It is a pleasure to get to be back here again tonight with all of you. Lift our voices in song, to turn our thoughts heavenward in prayer. Thank you, Mo, for the thoughts that you expressed. I really want to say thank you as well to Brother Orlando for not only the great singing, but because of the selection of songs that he has presented for us to sing tonight, because they align exactly with the type of things that I'd like for us to consider. We said that this weekend our thoughts are going to center on the topic of the benefits or blessings that Christianity brings to our world. Now, very often, unfortunately, people speak in negative terms about the Christian faith. And sometimes those who wear the name Christian don't behave well, and they give rise to criticism that might, in fact, be a little bit justified, at least as directed toward that person and their behavior. But the fact is that if we live the Christian faith the way the Lord has given it, we encourage ourselves to walk in the footsteps of Jesus, to be like our God and our Savior, as we've just sung, Christianity is a blessing. And the world needs to know that. In many ways, we are the ambassadors of Christ, and all I mean by that is that people often judge the Christian faith and maybe what they think about or know about God and Jesus based upon what they see in us, the people who are part of the family of God and who openly wear that name or designation. So we are a part of an avenue by which God can bless the world and turn people toward him. In John chapter 3, Jesus told Nicodemus, "If I be lifted up, I will draw all men unto me." I know he was speaking about the cross, but I think there's another way in which that can be taken that's very biblical, and that is that you and I lift him up, and then he's appealing and he draws people to him. And that's a part of our responsibility, and also the output, the fruit of living as the people of God. Many years ago, when our kids were younger, we're probably like many of you. Lee and I would go to PTA type events or other school activities with our kids, meet the teacher night or school carnival. And very often what happens, the kids are visiting or whatever, and we end up standing around next to the other parents, and make small talk and chit-chat. And we generally didn't know them. We're in a metropolitan area, kind of like San Francisco area, and we got to know some of the parents, but many of them we didn't. So we make small talk. And at some point or another, it was typical for the talk to turn to, "Oh, what do you do for a living?" And I would say, "Well, I'm a gospel preacher." Well, that is one way to bring a conversation to an abrupt stop, right? And I don't know if they just were surprised to hear somebody say that, or they didn't know what to say in response. I don't know that nobody ever showed any hostility or anything like that, but it wasn't what they expected to hear. And then I'd stop and I ask myself, what should people think about when they consider who is it that's in our community? Who are the kids and the adults, the young persons and the older ones that are in our schools and hallways and classrooms? What is the character like of the people that we see in the community, on the streets, in the grocery store, at the convenience store, or wherever it may be? Is there a reasonable expectation about what it would be like to encounter someone who's a gospel preacher or a Christian and what that represents? When I look in Matthew chapter 13 and verse 33, Jesus used a parable and likened the church, and that's us, right? He likened the church to leaven that was mixed through the entire loaf. This is one of those places where the word leaven is used in a positive way. And he described Christians, the church, as being mixed in among the people of the world in such a way that our influence for good was felt and experienced by other people. That is a part of our life and our responsibility. But if we're going to be a benefit, then we need to think seriously about, what does Rick bring to the fabric of my community? We live in a town of 6,000 people. It's hard to get lost. People know who you are, and they see how we live, right? Even in larger cities, we still cross paths with people. We still leave an influence or an effect. What should it be like for us as the people of God? One of the reasons why Christianity is such a blessing is because it seeks to instill within us all of these wonderful characteristics, these noble qualities of attitude and behavior that make our world a better place. God's teachings they're helpful. They help instill within us what it means to be a stand-up person and someone that others want to meet or be around because we exhibit the Christ-like qualities that are so good and helpful for all people to be influenced by and affected by. At the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount, when Jesus had spoken the Beatitudes, and in Matthew chapter 5, verses 13 through 16, he talks about being salt and about a city set on a hill and about a light in a room to show where things are, to give light to everyone there. But I love the fact that he wraps up those illustrations by saying, "Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven." Now that presumes a couple of things at least. Number one, that we're going to do things that are right. We're better than our old selves. We're better than the devil wants us to be if we walk in the steps of Jesus. The second thing that it does is it brings to awareness the fact I'm not just known for being good for good's sake. I'm being good. I'm trying to live a good life, a right life, positive influence, because God is teaching me to do so and asking me to do so. Because those two end up being linked. My neighbors, maybe, I just think about a neighbor who doesn't believe in God at all, but they're nice to people, they do good things, they might give to United Way or some benevolent cause. While those things are good, their beliefs don't ever allow them to link it to the Father above. So no one can take that person's actions and raise their eyes heavenward and say, "Thank you for instilling this in people." This person doesn't believe in God. That step is never made. That connection is never in front of us. But for Christians, absolutely. The fact that we wear this relationship openly means that people can see what we're doing, and should they ask or learn anything about us, well, that is because John is shaped by God's teachings and his grace, right? That is because Bethany is living a Christ-like life, and we would want to be able to say that about every person in the room and every Christian that we know, etc. So what I'd like for us to do tonight is I'm going to highlight a detail, and we'll do it in quick order, okay? We're going to do 5 characteristics or qualities that we can see surrounding Jesus and God's calls for his people that will absolutely transform the way that we interact with people around us. And if people were to imitate us and use us something as a guide, and Paul talks about that, be imitator of me like I am of Jesus, okay? If they were to imitate us, would it make the world a better place and maybe point people toward God above? Well, one of the things that I know that we see about Jesus, one of the things I love so much about him, is that Jesus is shown as being a person filled with compassion. Think about all the people that he encountered, the ones we might encounter. We have our moments where we're really high, things are going so well in life, and then all of a sudden we're in the bottom and we're suffering with challenges. The people around us are struggling with obstacles and difficulties. When we speak about compassion, it is about being able to identify with and to suffer with, to feel with someone who's having those down moments or those difficulties that they're facing, and encouraging them and letting them know that they are not alone. The writer Emma Wheeler Wilcox, now you may not recognize her name, but I bet you're going to recognize what she's done by the time I'm done. Okay? Emma Wheeler Wilcox was born in the state of Wisconsin in 1850. And from a very young age, she liked to write. In fact, she liked to write poetry. She published her first poem when she was only 13 years old. By the time that she graduated from high school, she had already published quite a lot of poetry, and ultimately she would be so well known for it that in the year 1883, at the age of 33, she was invited to come to the inaugural ball for the newly elected governor of the state of Wisconsin. So she describes her trip. She got on the train, older times. She got on the train, she rode there, but she describes that when she was in this car, there was a young woman there that was dressed all in black, and she was weeping and crying and distressed and all alone. Ellie did not know her, but she said she went over and tried to sit with her, and if nothing else, an arm around or, to just be a comfort somehow. By the time she got to the point where she got off, she went to the governor's mansion, the place for the ball. She was in her room, but she says she had such a hard time even focusing on what was coming that evening because she was still thinking about this woman grieving, all in black. I don't know, a young widow, perhaps? So while she was in her room, she sat there in front of the mirror and she began to compose the opening lines of her poem, Solitude. Maybe you'll recognize some. Laugh and the world laughs with you. Weep and you weep alone. For the sad old earth must borrow its mirth, but has trouble enough of its own. Maybe you've heard at least the first few words of that. When I read that, learned that about her, it immediately brought to my mind Romans chapter 12 and verse 15. Because by inspiration, Paul there says to Christians, in an imperial city, a large city, and influential in its time, he said, we're to rejoice with those who rejoice and to weep with those who weep. Personally, I've always found the front part of that a lot easier to do, yeah? I mean, we love birthdays and anniversaries and celebrations. Someone graduates from high school, we love celebrating and having a great party. Someone gets a new job, or they're promoted, or they have a retirement party, or they get married, or having a child. We love to celebrate. Those are the good times. It's also easy to do. What is harder, I think, more often, but maybe even more important, is to be able to weep with those who are really weeping. When they're facing some really challenging circumstance, to be somebody who can slow down enough to have time to interact with them. When I think about doing that, how much it can mean to someone who feels abandoned or lost or without much of anything at the moment, there's something. By the way, there are no magic words. There are no magic words. But maybe we can sit with somebody and offer, could we pray together? And we're invoking the presence of God into many people, even many who don't normally invest themselves in church-like activities. In those moments, they're thankful and say yes. Maybe we just let them lean against us and cry or grieve. We put an arm around. There doesn't have to be anything to say because there are no magic words. But there is a comforting presence. One of the reasons I love thinking about Jesus so much, and for people who never read their Bible and never become acquainted with the Savior, they miss this. One of the reasons I love thinking about him so much is the Bible uses the word compassion with Jesus a lot. The word compassion is synonymous with the word sympathy. Both of them have the sense of being able to feel something along with another person. When their heart hurts, my heart hurts. When they are saddened and grieving, you are saddened and grieving for them and with them. Here's where the Bible speaks about Jesus. I'll give you just a couple of examples. In Matthew chapter 14, in verse number 14, the Bible tells us that Jesus saw a great multitude and he was moved with compassion on them, and he healed their sick. So here's an instance in which he used his presence, his encouragement, and his divine power to assist people who are struggling with physical problems. And of course, those weigh on our minds and our hearts as well. But there's also a sense in which Jesus very clearly would have compassion upon people who were just struggling with making sense out of life. I don't know what to do. The circumstances seem overwhelming. I'm confused. Oh, it's not that I have a pain in my side or some ache. It's my heart is aching. And so in Matthew chapter 9, verses 36 through 38, I love this. It's one of my favorite passages in all of the Bible. The text tells us that Jesus looked out and he saw the people. Now, these are religious folk, right? They're Jewish background. They have a religion. They know the law of Moses, whether they keep it much or not. They're at least familiar. They're religious. But he looked out and he saw these people, that they were confused, and they seemed like sheep having no real shepherd. And the Bible says he was moved with compassion on them. That's when he turned to his apostles and he said, pray to the Lord of the harvest. Now what's interesting to me is he didn't say, pray that these people are rescued from their directionless, their confusion, they need a guide. He doesn't say that. What he says is pray that the Lord of the harvest would send forth workers. Now if you're a person who can feel when another suffers and give them a shoulder to lean upon, give them an encouraging hug, say a prayer with them, you are a fulfillment, at least in part, of the prayer that Jesus said to pray in Matthew chapter 9. The people of God help answer the prayers of the people of God. There are obviously things that we cannot do, but there are a lot of things that, frankly, we can do, and we should. For the world to know the church as a group of people with tender hearts who can grieve, who can support, who can encourage, who can celebrate, but also lift up and support. That is a great recognition. Why is Christianity a blessing to the world? Because it teaches people to be compassionate and tender-hearted and to care about the circumstances in other people's lives. Number 2. Now, this one is fairly close. I don't deny that it's rather a close cousin in a way, but it's more than just what we mentioned a moment ago. Maybe we'd say it is an additional step with needs that might be true to the moment. And it is, number 2, that we need to be a people of benevolence and generosity. Benevolence and generosity. Benevolence just means goodwill, being willing to engage in actions of whatever type for the benefit and well-being of someone who stands in need. Now, it can be through money, it can be through time, it can be through energy. As I get older, that's a more precious commodity. It could be through an opportunity that we see somebody needs a help or a helping hand, and you know what? I'm the person right here who would like to assist in whatever way I can, and those ways matter. Did you know God has always asked for his people to be persons who are benevolent and generous in dealings with those who might stand in need? If you go back in the Old Testament, to the book of Leviticus, for example, Leviticus chapter 19, verse number 10, God encouraged the Israelites as they're getting ready, and at some point, they're going to come into the land of Canaan, they'll settle it, they'll farm it, they'll rear their children there, they'll live, right? And in Leviticus 19, verse 10, he said, when you are harvesting, and you're harvesting and some grapes fall and hit the ground, some fruit just kind of falls off the branch or the vine and hits the ground, he said, you don't gather that up. You leave it. Because there's somebody coming along who doesn't have a parcel of land. They might be a widow, they might be travelers, they might be orphans, they don't have. You let that lie on the ground so they can come get it. That's benevolence commanded by God. Later in chapter 23, in verse number 22, he talks about the actual harvesting action. He said, don't go to the fence row and get every square foot of your acreage. Rick's terminology, right? Let the corners just stay. Because the traveler, the poor, the widows, orphans, those who don't have, they can draw on those. And that's an action intended to bless people who need some help. God taught that. And when they were doing right, his people practiced that. And it had an impact, it made a difference. So now I turn my head to the New Testament, and I read things like Galatians chapter 6, verses 9 and 10. Here's Paul writing by inspiration to churches across an entire region, a section of what we know today as the country of Turkey. And in Galatians 6, verses 9 and 10, he said, let us not grow tired or weary in well-doing, right? In doing good things, let's not grow tired or weary of doing that, because in due season we're going to reap, we'll have a product, a harvest, if we don't give up or stop. And then in verse number 10 he says, let us do good unto all people, especially those who are of the household of faith. I'm going to go backwards in that verse number 10 for a moment. Especially those who are the household of faith, it is a good thing when brothers and sisters try to help out in whatever ways or limits we can our brothers and sisters in the faith. That's what family does. But if we go backwards, especially those of the household of faith, but look earlier in verse 10, really to all people. I love it when the church, and I know we have to be judicious and careful with our resources and things, especially finances and so forth, but isn't it good to have the church known as a people who care and use what they have available to bless those who are really in need? Kindness expressed through benevolent actions can leave a lasting impact. I want to talk for a moment about, even here in the United States, some more recent episodes that have to do with church activity. Now, I'm going to broaden this a little bit to talk about churches of various backgrounds, and I realize, that's distinct from New Testament Christianity. But even then, I'm going to say a lot of churches are going to try to do things that are helpful because they're operating on a lot of the same principles that we're going to be looking at in the Bible, right? And still, they're going to try to say it's a church group. It's in the name of God and Jesus. So at least from a reputation standpoint, they're still pointing in a direction that makes people stop and think maybe Christianity is offering something positive. For example, tornadoes tore through Joplin, Missouri, not far, 30 minutes from where I was born and grew up. In 2011, in fact, it hit on a Sunday evening, just about the time they were coming together for their 5, 6 o'clock service time, right? And members of the church were affected, and others too. A lot of churches, including a lot of members of the Lord's church, supplied things to help, whether it was water, and a lot of it was money and gift cards and things. Take care of what you need. I don't know what that is, but you do, and here's some resources. And so I know one particular woman who, from Austin, Texas, churches there had gathered a lot of supplies, but also a lot of funds and gift cards and things, and connected with the congregation of the Lord's people right there in that area, where I was born and grew up, right? And this particular woman drove the vehicle and pulled a trailer with all of these supplies and took 4 teenagers with her, and they spent about 4 or 5 days not only dropping things off, but she and these teenagers went through and helped remove debris and gave a helping hand to people who needed some assistance. And the woman who did that was Lee. And 2 of the teenagers were our 2 older children, and then a couple of others. Now, I don't say that except to say, here we are, ordinary people, trying to make a difference in ways that are meaningful and have significance. And the reason is because God teaches us to be concerned about those in the world as well as those in the household of faith. And so there are a lot of other people that do things like that all the time, but think about how much of an impact that makes. Did you know that in 2005, during Hurricane Katrina, the Gulf Coast, really devastating, the Red Cross estimates that as many as 90% of all the meals that they served to workers and displaced figures, maybe their homes have been completely lost, 90% of the meals that they served were provided by churches. And whatever else, they're going to be wearing the name Christian and trying to give credit. Why are you doing this? Because God says we're to be people like this. And it's how we would like to be assisted if the circumstances were flipped. 90%. Churches routinely provide medical and dental assistance, infrastructure assistance to low-income and impoverished areas, not just in the United States, but around the world. I know because I know some of the people who do things like that when they have the resources and the opportunity. And then somebody looks at that and says, well, why? And the answer is because we have a God who teaches us to love other people and to try to help out where we have a chance to do so. And the golden rule says, boy, if I were really struggling, it would be great if somebody were to help me and my family. I would be so incredibly, profoundly thankful. It is unfortunate, the case that even growing up in little bitty Miami, Oklahoma, and if you say Miami, which is what it looks like, that's fine, and we're very glad to have you visiting with us, because if you live there, it's Miami, Oklahoma. Some of my classmates and others, I see them post sometimes on social media, they're very critical of Christianity. And I hate that. And these are people I've known since I was just a boy. many of them. And what's more is I will look and I will see what they do with their lives and things. And what I don't see is I don't see them taking funds out of their pockets to try to assist people they've never met because those people had a disaster and they need a helping hand. I don't see them getting into a vehicle and driving 400, 600 miles to take things and then put on work gloves and go through a home that was destroyed. I mean, that's what Christianity especially engenders and asks us to do. And these are all the large-scale things, right? This is to say nothing of the time that you have personally maybe given somebody money for a meal, or you have helped somebody that was broke down on the side of the road, or you have done something to bless or to help somebody. You didn't know them from Adam, but they're a person, and they matter, and you had a chance, and you did something good. And that could be multiplied across however many persons. I find these statistics really encouraging, right? Did you know that the Lord's church, and I'm talking mainstream bodies of the Lord's church, not the extreme one way or loosing on the other side, mainstream. Did you know that among religious or church groups in the United States, the Lord's church is number one in weekly attendance worship services? Did you know that? It's a fact. Did you know that the Lord's church is number one, I hesitate to use the second number because it's number one in weekly giving? Whether high or low is a different discussion, but it's number one among all church groups in weekly giving. You know, I kind of think those probably go together, right? We invest ourselves in things that we believe or know to be important. And it's not just our time and our energy, it's the resources that God has entrusted to our care and our stewardship, whatever the case may be. Did you know that, at least within the last few years, we are the number 4 largest among all church groups in terms of number of locations nationwide, more than there are locations of Starbucks, and that's a lot of locations, yo, all right? And here's one that often gets, since I'm giving you stats, let me give you one more and I'll be done. Did you know that the Lord's church is number one among all church groups in America for retaining their young people ages 20 to 29? Number one. And that's more than half. I mean, it's approaching 2/3 plus, 70%. And did you know that even among those who might decide that they're going to kind of spin off out of orbit a little bit in their late 20s, you know what often happens when they enter their 30s? They're getting married, they're having children. Maybe some of the wildest, they're considering their pathways. More than half of them come back because they have foundations and roots that matter. So I give that as an aside, but an important aside, because very often we hear terms doom and gloom and, we've got to look and see what the denominations are doing. I'll just tell you flat out, the denominations are struggling. I've had people ask me, how do y'all do it? And I'm like, well, let's point to the Bible. We can talk about things God has wanted us to do. All right, we do things because we believe in them, because the Lord has taught us that these things are important. Benevolence and generosity. Jesus was that way. The apostles and early Christians, Dorcas in Acts chapter 9, was known for helping make clothing for people who were needy. In Acts chapter 4, Barnabas and others would even sell property, and they'd take the funds and they'd give them to the apostles. You help these people who need something. A lot of this concern for benevolence and generosity, it characterized, it typified our early brothers and sisters in the faith. Number 3. Kindness and common humanity. Oftentimes people are looked at and evaluated for what they bring to the table. All right, how much do we know? How much experience do we have? Do we have a lot of years to work that we can give great productivity to a company or a business, for example? Getting older, maybe less worthy of our attention. Young, kind of disposable. Oftentimes people are evaluated for what they've got or what they bring, and not because of who they are as people created in the image of God. Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 and 27. Christianity says people are important because they're important, not because they're people who have stuff or experience or time to work. That is not how God values people, right? And so he teaches us to look at others and see the same thing, and to see people of any color, language, it doesn't matter. God looks and says, these are people created in my image, and they are important. I'm sure you've heard of the figure Helen Keller. I'd like to tell you a small snippet from Helen Keller, and then I'll tie it to some biblical references, okay? Helen Keller, in case you're not familiar with her, she lived in the late 1800s, early 1900s. She was completely deaf and blind, okay? So you think about all the limitations. We think how challenging that would be. She actually had a woman who really spent her life traveling with her as kind of her assistant help, right? And they learned a sign language form that they could use by touch, so communicate. All right. So here's Helen Keller's side of the story, and I just want to highlight kindness and concern for another person. Common humanity. Here's what she says. Well, all right, let me back up just a smidge. She met Mark Twain. You may know Mark Twain, right? Huck Finn. She met him when she was 14 years old. He made it possible for her to attend Radcliffe College in New England. She actually graduated with her Bachelor of Arts in 1904. She learned to read English, German, Latin, and French, all of which were in Braille. That's impressive. There's a great mind inside. It just has difficulties communicating in some ways with the outside world. She was a prolific writer as well. So she and Mark Twain became very, very close friends. He's older, kind of a father type figure to her. And on one occasion, she mentions that he had read for her a part of a short story he was writing called Eve's Diary. And here's what she said in describing it. Okay, listen to these. It's poignant. She said, "To one who is hampered and circumscribed or limited as I am, it was a wonderful experience to have a friend like Mr. Clemens, Sam Clemens, Mark Twain. I recall many talks with him about human affairs. Here you go. He never made me feel that my opinions were worthless. He knew that we do not think with eyes and ears, and that our capacity for thought is not measured by the five senses. He always kept me in mind while we talked, and he treated me like a competent human being. That is why I loved him. It has been said that life has treated me harshly. And sometimes I've complained in my heart because many pleasures of human experience have been withheld from me. But when I recollect the treasure of friendship that has been bestowed upon me, I withdraw all charges against life. If much has been denied me, much, very much, has been given me. So long as the memory of certain beloved friends lives in my heart, I shall say that life is good." Isn't it interesting? When she says what mattered, it wasn't things. It was the way that she was treated by people who could have simply ignored her because it was just too challenging to interact with somebody who was so limited, right? I hold that up, and I look at Rick for this reason. You know, we had the chance to cross paths with people of all types. And what is it that I see in them, and what do I acknowledge in them? And hopefully they in me, and it's a common humanity. We are all created in God's image, which means that every person has an inherent worth. On the flip side of that, I think about cliques and movies like Mean Girls or other situations where there are people who make fun of, who dismiss, who wouldn't give the time of day to another person because they have such a diminished or degraded view of what other people are like or what they are worth. It's easy to overlook and forget other people. But then I read Romans chapter 12 and verse number 16, where Paul says, "Live in harmony with one another. Do not be arrogant, but associate with the lowly, and never be wise in your own sight." Proper treatment of other people should be a hallmark of God's people, always. For me, for you, for all of us. And it should be directed to all people. So I want to stop for just a moment, and I want us to think about Jesus himself. You know, Jesus interacted with the Samaritan woman, with children, with lepers, with Gentiles, with Jews, with the rich, with the poor, with servants, with Roman centurions. We would be better, served to ask the question, who did Jesus not interact with? Because that's an incredibly short list, made up of exactly no people. Jesus had time for anyone. Now, he could become unhappy with folks who behaved badly, sure, but he still interacted with them, and he would have encouraged them to do what was right and help make their lives better. The book of Luke and the book of Acts, both of those two together, of course, written by the writer Luke, the gospel writer Luke, both of them show Jesus and the early apostles and disciples interacting with anybody that they had the opportunity to interact with, because they see in people God's image and an origin with the Creator. Psalm 139, David writes and says things, you have made me, you formed me from my mother's womb. Let me just say, if that's true for David, it's true for you, it's true for your neighbor, it's true for the guy down the street who's not living the way he ought to live. It's still true about him. Is there a way that I can have a positive impact? Number 4. I once had a coworker who was, she was generally a thoughtful, happy, decent person, loved her family, some really great qualities. However, at other times she could be really petty and vindictive, impatient, and exceedingly unkind. She was really a Jekyll and Hyde type of figure, right? What she lacked was the ability to have patience with other people and forbearance and forgiveness. So, to the people that she got along with well, she was a lovely friend and a great person. But if somebody made a mistake, even accidentally said something that crossed her, in some way was perceived wrong, she didn't forgive, she didn't forget, and she was not a nice person to those individuals anymore. And at times you weren't sure which person you were going to get when you interacted with her. Well, that's not the way that we are asked to be. So here's my question for us. How are the people of God supposed to behave when someone really is taxing? Or they've done something wrong towards us, whether they're aware of it or not? How do we behave with people who have really pushed us to our limits, for example? Because I know how the world often speaks about dealing with other people. And it's not what I read about in the pages of the Bible. Did you know that the number one theme that is found in books, television programs, and movies in the United States is the theme of vengeance or revenge? There was even an ABC television program, long-running multi-series, and the title of it was Revenge. That's exactly right. Okay. Well, we even have phrases for it, right? Don't get mad, get even. Yeah? Okay. But, for people who are really sophisticated, and want to sound a little better than that, we have ways we phrase things, right? Revenge is a dish that is best served cold. I should say that in like a British accent or something like that, It's a sophisticated way of saying the same thing, almost as if we get a pass. That is not how the Bible presents it, though. What the Bible shows is people who can manage themselves meekly, that is with self-control, to respond appropriately to the needs of the situation. Always. I love the fact that we sang the songs, really, Let the Beauty of Jesus Be Seen in Me. Thank you again, Orlando. We could have added another one. Angry words, for example. Angry words, oh, let them never. From the tongue, unbridled slip. May the heart's best impulse ever catch them or stop them ere they soil the lip. Our songs remind us that we need to be more noble, higher than that, able to have control, patience in dealing with others, forbearance, and even forgiveness when someone has done something against us. I want to read the words of Colossians chapter 3, verses 12 through 15, and see if some of the exact things that we've been talking about don't surface right in the middle of this, really just one paragraph. Colossians chapter 3, verses 12 down through 15. By the way, in the context, Paul is saying, we used to be this way, non-Christ-like, not Christians. Our lives characterized by all the bad habits and ugly attitudes. But he says, now we've changed. And then he gives this list. These are the characteristics or attributes that should describe us. And here's what he says. Put on then, as God's chosen ones, holy and beloved, compassionate hearts. We started with that one, right? Kindness, humility, meekness, and patience. Bearing with one another, and if one has a complaint against another, forgiving each other. As the Lord has forgiven you, so you also must forgive. And above all these, put on love, which binds everything together in perfect harmony. And that's when we get to verse 15, not before. Notice verse 15 is the payoff. And let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, to which indeed you were called in one body, and be thankful. People say, I want a peace-filled life. Wonderful. God wants us to be able to have that. But there are certain things that need to characterize us to make that be the end result. If we're compassionate, if we're kind to other people, if we are patient in dealing with them, forbearing with people when they're challenging maybe, forgiving when they've done something wrong. Those are all the components that allow us to have a peace-filled heart. The people who are so stirred up and who so angry themselves inside, they are not described by the words we've just mentioned. So we want to be compassionate people. There's such a common anger and rancor and hatred and hostility. Our world would be a whole lot better with patience and kindness and humility and forbearance and a whole heaping helping of forgiveness. Last and done. The last thing that I want to mention is the topic of purity. Purity. God's people are to be described as tied to purity. It might seem old-fashioned to a lot of people, an emphasis upon purity in speech, purity in our thoughts, purity in the way we carry ourselves, present ourselves to the world, the things that we engage in. It might seem a bit old-fashioned, but it is not. It's tied to human dignity. It is tied to an identity that is formed around the person of Christ. A few years ago, I saw a television program on Facebook. I love movies. You know, I could watch and I could do in movies, but I have to be careful about what I watch because I don't want impure things in, right? So I saw this post about a new series that was coming out, and the basic description of the plot, you know, and I looked it up and I thought, oh, this sounds like it would be great. And then I read the reviews of what it contained. I thought, this is not going to be good. Bad language, bad actions, bad sexuality, and things like that. So I knew what I was doing. I was putting a target on myself, and I didn't care. I wanted people to know. So among the however many other hundreds or thousands of comments, you know, I have no idea who posted this, but I wrote on there, and I just simply said, this sounds like an amazing show. I would so much like to watch this. Unfortunately, because of all of the objectionable elements, I will not be watching a single episode of this show. It's got stuff that people shouldn't be saying, doing, or showing. I got pushback. You're not surprised, right? I had some who wrote back, and they used some really they used bad words to describe me. And I thought, see? A lot of fixing needs to take place. One guy wrote and he said, well, Rick, it sounds like, I didn't know him, he just saw my name. He said, it sounds like you haven't watched any movies since like 1930 or something. And I said, it may seem like that, but it's not worth it to put ugly in my mind because it degrades me as well as the people I see saying and doing these various things. And I won't watch if that's the cost for it. And he replied back, and I give him a little bit of credit because he said, well, there are a lot of bad things in there. I went, yeah, there are, I think people, I wouldn't say those words, okay, but we let them into our minds and they circulate. I remember when I was in junior high school, and you're about 12 or 13 and you're thinking, oh, I want to be big, I want to be grown up and all that, and we started saying bad words. It was a lot easier to stop saying those bad words, which I did fairly quickly, and I should have. It was a lot harder to get them to stop moving around inside my thoughts. Things get inside. They're hard to purge out, right? People say, oh, it's just on television. Here was my question for people, and I apologize. I'm not trying to be graphic, but I want to be honest about this. If we had guests come into our home, if we had the actors and actresses from that television program came into our house, and people were like, oh, I can't believe they're at your house, and we sat down at the dining table with them and had dinner with our kids and our wives, our families, our husbands, whatever, would we really allow them to use those bad words at our dining table and not say something like, we don't talk that way here? Big question. Would we pop popcorn? I love popcorn. Would we pop popcorn and take a Diet Dr. Pepper or whatever and go into the den and then ask them to act out while we sat on the sofa and the recliner and watched, to act out those sex scenes right there in the middle of our den floor? But then people stop and act like if we digitize it and we send it over the airwaves or the cable or we see it on an 80-foot screen in a movie theater, oh, it's okay, we just ignore those parts. Really? Digitizing it does not change its fundamental character and the ugly that it represents. It is not inappropriate for God's people to have an emphasis upon purity. We face temptations. I do, you do, things like that, but we still need to have some standards. In 1 John chapter 3 and verse 8, the Bible says that Jesus was manifested to destroy the works of the devil. Would Jesus sit there and watch while they were in our den floor? Would he sit there comfortably at the table while they spoke, at dinner with us, the way that they speak in television programs and movies, et cetera, et cetera? And the answer would be no, of course. So how can Jesus come to destroy those kinds of ugly works? And then I sit on the side and I allow those things to come into my mind as if they were welcome or not objectionable or, oh, I just ignore those. Not the right answer. When Paul wrote in Philippians chapter 4 and verse 8, I love that. It's another one of my favorite verses. I have a few of those. But it lifts up these virtuous qualities and asks Christians, really of all places and times, to focus upon those. He says, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there's any excellence, if there's any good reputation, he says, think on these things. So what was he trying to squeeze out? The writer in Psalm 101 verse 3 said, I will set no wicked thing before my eyes. I know that Satan tempts us, but we need to have a commitment to a standard. And when we fall, we apologize and we get up and we recommit, if you will, to the practice and pursuit of purity. That should define God's people. And if God's people stand up with those kind of standards, we make the world around us better as well. For one thing, we do not consume. And from a purely marketing perspective, maybe the interest drops and people change their tune. Another is we don't allow the outside to influence us. We want to influence the outside. That's the way that it's supposed to be. So, the simple truth is, here, we'll wrap this up. The simple truth is the world is better when God's people are in it and they're living the way God calls all people to live. We have an impact in our families, in our communities, in our jobs, or wherever else we may be, in our schools and universities. Absolutely, right? I saw a bumper sticker that said something that stuck with me, and I thought it was so good. It said, think globally, and then what? Act locally. If all the world could be this way, wouldn't this be great? Well, I can't speak for all the world, but I can speak for Rick. And Lee and I can speak for Lee and Rick's house, for example, right? And so I'm going to act locally where I can to hold up all the virtuous, high-quality, noble elements that God wants his people to pursue that are worthy of our God. And if enough people do that and share their influence, it can have a large impact upon the people of our world. I really appreciate all of your attention tonight, your encouragement, your presence here on a Saturday night. I thank all of you, and I'm encouraged by your company, and I hope these thoughts have been worth your time. I would simply close by saying this requires each of us to be sincere and Christ-like in what we think, what we say, and what we do. No excuses for cutting corners, no allowing ourselves to be other than the best. I go back to the song that we sang, let the beauty of Jesus be seen in me. And that's the decision that every one of us has to make for ourselves. And that whole process begins with the thought that we are, number one, New Testament Christians, baptized into Christ, our sins washed away. We get a fresh start, innocent and clean. And Satan has no hold on us at that point. If you're here tonight and you've not been baptized into Christ, I really want to encourage you to consider making that decision, even this evening, to say, I want to be one of these members of God's great family. I want to be a disciple of Jesus. And we would love to help you obey the gospel and to make this your nature and character. And to those who are with us who are members of the Lord's church, if you've been struggling and wrestling with these things, I encourage you to approach the Lord, of course. Talk to him. Consider the things he has to say, and if need be, apologize and make adjustments. And if it's a situation that we can help with, prayer and encouragement, then we want to do that. That's what families do. They help each other be better and be strong and move forward in a positive way. And that's what we want to do tonight. If we can help you in any way in your spiritual walk to be connected to the Lord and a faithful part of his family, we want to help. And all you have to do is let us know how we can help while we stand together